Hi everybody. Welcome to another day of reading The Giver. We left off at the end of chapter 3. We're on page 16 in the PDF. You don't have to follow along, guys. Obviously, you can read as I read with the video. But if you need a reference to go back to when you're answering questions, we are going to be focusing towards the end of chapter 3 and most of chapter 4 today. So just something to keep in mind. To recap, let me pull up my notes. So yesterday we talked about, so first of all, our Jonas's dad brought Gabriel home, which is the baby that his dad was originally upset about and worried about because he wasn't growing as quickly as the other kids, and they were worried that they were going to release him if he did not catch up. So if you recall, Jonas's dad asked the family if he could bring the baby home at night just to give it some extra care so that he could hopefully catch up with the other new children. And Lily and his mom, of course, are just enamored by the baby, right? Everybody loves babies. I know I love babies. But there's something different about the baby that reminds Lily of Jonas, and that's Jonas's eyes, right? And it's their color that really draws attention to them. And from what we can tell, having pale eyes like Jonas and Gabriel is not very common. The majority, it sounds like, of the people in the community have dark eyes, and so his eyes really stand out. And I told you that this was a bit of foreshadowing, and it is. And we have it in our notes here. And we're going to get more of an explanation of why that's foreshadowing here in a minute. Not in a minute, literally, but soon we're going to get more information about that. And then we have the changing apple. And I asked you in your bell work today what you thought how you thought the apple changed. What do you think happened to the apple? And I'm not going to give you the answer to that question just yet. If you're frustrated, too bad. There's gonna be some other things that change, and hopefully with those hints, with the other things that also change, you'll start to pick up on what is happening. So just something to keep in mind. But I told you that was also a bit of foreshadowing. And then the mention of the receiver in chapter 2 was another bit of foreshadowing. So we're getting some big hints at some things that are going to be happening here very, very soon. So stay tuned. But we left off in chapter 3. If you're in the PDF, we're on page 16, and we are right here. But it hadn't. But it hadn't. The only thing that had happened was the announcement later that evening over the speaker. The announcement that had singled him out without using his name, that had caused both of his parents to glance meaningfully at his desk where the apple still lay. Now, sitting at his desk, staring at his homework as his family hovered over the new child in its basket, he shook his head, trying to forget the odd incident. He forced himself to arrange his papers and try to study a little before the evening meal. The new child, Gabriel, stirred and whimpered, and father spoke softly to Lily, explaining the feeding procedure as he opened the container that held the formula and equipment. The evening proceeded, as all evenings did in the family unit, in the dwelling, in the community. Quiet, reflective, a time for renewal and preparation for the day to come. It was different only in the addition of the new child with his pale, solemn, knowing eyes. Chapter 4. Jonas rode at a leisurely pace, glancing at the bike ports beside the buildings to see if he could spot Asher's. He didn't often do his volunteer hours with his friend because Asher frequently fooled around and made serious work a little difficult. But now, with 12 coming so soon and the volunteer hours ending, it didn't seem to matter. The freedom to choose where to spend those hours had always seemed a wonderful luxury to Jonas. Other hours of the day were so carefully regulated. He remembered when he had become an 8, as Lily would do shortly, and had been faced with the freedom of choice. The 8s always set out on their first volunteer hour a little nervously, giggling and staying in groups of friends. They almost invariably did their hours on recreation duty first, helping with the younger ones in a place where they still felt comfortable. But with guidance, as they developed self-confidence and maturity, they moved on to the other jobs, gravitating toward those that would suit their own interests and skills. A male 11 named Benjamin had done his entire nearly 4 years in the rehabilitation center working with citizens who had been injured. It was rumored that he was as skilled now as the rehabilitation directors themselves, and that he even developed some machines and methods to hasten rehabilitation. There was no doubt that Benjamin would receive his assignment to that field and would probably be permitted to bypass most of the training. Jonas was impressed by the things Benjamin had achieved. He knew him, of course, since they had always been group mates, but they had never talked about the boy's accomplishments because such a conversation would have been awkward for Benjamin. There was never any comfortable way to mention or discuss one's successes without breaking the rule against bragging, even if one didn't mean to. It was a minor rule, rather like rudeness, punishable only by gentle chastisement, but still. Better to steer clear of an occasion governed by a rule which would be so easily broken. The area of dwellings behind him, Jonas rode past the community structures, hoping to spot Asher's bicycle parked behind one of the small factories or office buildings. He passed the child care center where Lily stayed after school and the play area surrounding it. He rode through the central plaza and the large auditorium where the public meetings were held. Jonas slowed and looked at the name tags on the bicycles lined up outside the nurturing center. Then he checked those outside food distribution. It was always fun to help with the deliveries, and he hoped he would find his friend there so that they could go together on the daily rounds, carrying the cartons of supplies into the dwelling of the community. But he finally found Asher's bike, leaning as usual, instead of upright in its port, as it should have been, at the house of the old. There was only one other child's bicycle there, that of a female 11 named Fiona. Jonas liked Fiona. She was a good student, quiet and polite, but she had a sense of fun as well, and it didn't surprise him that she was working with Asher today. He parked his bike neatly in the port beside theirs and entered the building. Okay, so we get some more detail about the volunteer hours. They were briefly mentioned in chapter 2 when Jonas's parents are trying to give him advice on his feelings about the ceremony of 12. And we said that the whole reason for the volunteer hours is to help the committee of elders figure out what job to assign you when you turn 12. And so that's the whole purpose for the volunteer hours. But now we find out that you are assigned volunteer hours when you turn 8. So for 4 years, you go out in the community and you volunteer at different places to see what you're interested in, and to help the elders understand where you're going to fit best in the community as far as working goes. So that's pretty exciting. And we know that Jonas is just trying to hang out with his friends for the last little bit before they all get their jobs and have to kind of stray away from each other, which is natural, right? They're just doing it at a very, very, very young age. I do want to kind of preface this next part coming up, moving into the house of the old. It gets weird. That's the best way to describe it. I just ask that you be mature about it. If you have questions, I will do my best to answer them, hopefully through the video. But again, if you still have questions, you can always email or message me. But yes, just be aware that it's kind of weird. It's a little awkward, but we're going to get through it together and it'll be fine. So just hold on to those thoughts in your head as we continue reading. "Hello, Jonas," the attendant at the front desk said. She handed him the sign-up sheet and stamped her own official seal behind his signature. All of his volunteer hours would be carefully tabulated at the Hall of Open Records. Once, long ago, it was whispered among the children, and 11 had arrived at the ceremony of 12, only to hear a public announcement that he had not completed the required number of volunteer hours and would not, therefore, be given his assignment. He had been permitted an additional month in which to complete the hours, and then given his assignment privately with no applause, no celebration, a disgrace that had clouded his entire future. "It's good to have some volunteers here today," the attendant told him. "We celebrated a release this morning, and that always throws the schedule off a little, so things get backed up." She looked at the printed sheet. "Let's see, Asher and Fiona are helping in the bathing room. Why don't you join them there? You know where it is, don't you?" Jonas nodded, thanked her, and walked down the long hallway. He glanced into the rooms on either side. The old were sitting quietly, some visiting and talking with one another, others doing handwork, and simple crafts. A few were asleep. Each room was comfortably furnished, and the floors covered with thick carpeting. It was a serene and slow slow-paced place until the busy centers of manufacture, unlike the busy centers of manufacture and distribution where the daily work of the community occurred. Jonas was glad that he had, over the years, chosen to do his hours in a variety of places so that he could experience the differences. He realized, though, that not focusing on one area meant he was left with not the slightest idea, not even a guess, of what his assignment would be. He laughed softly, thinking about the ceremony again. He laughed softly, thinking about the ceremony again, Jonas, he teased himself. But he suspected that with the date so near, probably all of his friends were too. He passed the caretaker walking slowly with one of the old in the hall. "Hello, Jonas," the young uniformed man said, smiling pleasantly. The woman beside him, whose arm he held, was hunched over as she shuffled along in her soft slippers. She looked toward Jonas and smiled, but her dark eyes were clouded and blank. He realized she was blind. He entered the bathing room with its warm, moist air and scent of cleansing lotions. He removed his tunic, hung it carefully on the wall hook, and put on the volunteer smock that was folded on the shelf. "Hi, Jonas," Asher called from the corner where he was kneeling beside a tub. Jonas saw Fiona nearby, at a different tub. She looked up and smiled at him, but she was busy gently washing a man who lay in the warm water. Jonas greeted them and the caretaking attendant at work nearby. Then he went to the row of padded lounge chairs where others of the old were waiting. He had worked here before. He knew what to do. "Your turn, Farissa," he said, reading the name tag on the woman's robe. "I'll just start the water and then help you up." He pressed the button on a nearby empty tub and watched as the warm water flowed in through the many small openings on the sides. The tub would be filled in a minute, and the water would stop automatically. Sorry guys, I had to see how much time I have left on my recording. He helped the woman from the chair, led her to the tub, removed her robe, and steadied her with his hand on her arm as she stepped in and lowered herself. She leaned back and sighed with pleasure, her head on the soft cushioned headrest. "Comfortable?" he asked. She nodded, closed her eyes. Jonas squeezed cleansing lotion onto the clean sponge at the edge of the tub and began to wash her frail body. Okay. Yes. These children are washing old people. Yes, I know that's weird. I'm really glad, honestly, that I'm not reading this to you in person so that we don't have to sit and talk about this for the next 15 minutes. Yes, it's weird, and I know it's weird, but you need to understand something. Remember, this community they don't think about this stuff. It's okay for them to do this. And I don't want to give too much away about why just yet, but it's not sexualized to put things into perspective. Okay, they're not thinking about any of that stuff. The fact that they're naked is okay. They're old people and young people. It's not weird for them. Okay, so I need you guys to understand that part. It's not weird in this instance for these, because they're volunteering, right? They're helping these old people who can't take care of themselves still be clean and comfortable. That's the whole point of doing the volunteer hours, especially in this part of the community. So get past your weirdness about it. I understand that it's awkward and different, and you probably don't wash any old people in your free time, and that's fine, right? Nobody's asking you to. But in this community, the children, they all take care of each other, right? That's the whole point. Remember, this community is a dystopia, and remember what your definition is. A dystopia is trying to become a utopia, which is paradise on earth, but the way that the governing body goes about it makes it a dystopia, okay? And as of right now, the only thing that we've seen that would make it a dystopia is all the government surveillance and rules, okay? But everything else would suggest that it doesn't sound like a really terrible place to live. Maybe really boring, but not terrible, right? Everything's clean, you're well taken care of, you don't have to pay for anything. Your only job is to do your job, right? And so everybody's taking care of each other, and that's the whole point of these volunteer hours, to help take care of everybody else, but to also obviously figure out where you're going to be placed in the community. Okay, so I understand the visual is awkward and weird, but it is what it is. Okay, so we're going to continue reading and we're going to move past it. Last night he had watched as his father bathed the new child. This was much the same. The fragile skin, the soothing water, the gentle motion of his hands